Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Jay and I'll be doing a series of tutorials to explain how DOM manipulation works. I'll be doing this by building project in each tutorial using vanilla JavaScript. I've designed this course in such a way that by the end of each video, you'll be learning a concept in JavaScript. So without further ado, let's jump into our first project. The first project that we'll be building is an accordion. You might have already seen how an accordion looks like. Let's look at an accordion example on the web. Accordion UI design. So an accordion is something that looks like this, where you'll be seeing few sections where all these sections are collapsed by default. And when you click on one of the section, there is content under that section which expands, and then you'll be able to look at the contents of that section. And this is a general design pattern that is used in web, where if you want to segregate content of a web page under different sections and you want to show them selectively in a particular order, that's when we use an accordion. And it's an interesting design that we can try to build using vanilla JavaScript. So first thing is I have a project on my VS Code here where I named it as an accordion tutorial. And I have three different files. One is index.html, and then I have a JavaScript file, and then a CSS file. So uh, right now on the right side, we see a browser tab open where there is a live server. Let me open it again. So this is my live server. I've opened this using a live server. There is also a tutorial on how to set up a live server. This is very handy when you are building static websites on your editor, where you don't have to go back and refresh it again and again. So whenever I make a change, it'll immediately reflect on the browser without the need for manual reload. All right, so let's try to build something, build an accordion which looks something like this. I'm not going to be focusing on the animation and the CSS, but it'll be more focused on JavaScript. And there's also an important concept that we need to learn while building this kind of patterns. So the focus will be around that. All right, let me save this empty. So we have a body and then there is an empty container here. The next thing that I would like to do is I will go and add three different sections or divs here. And let's call this, let me pull it this way. And let me call this as, let's place this here. Okay, and let's call this as section 1. This will be section 1. Or actually, let's just call this, let's have an h3 and a paragraph within this. We'll be following a similar pattern for the other divs too. So let's get rid of this and call this as section 2 and call this as section 3. Within the first section, I'll have an h3 with content section 1. Let's do similar things for section 2 and section 3. Okay, now we have section 1, section 2, and section 3. And we can also grab some lorem ipsum code to fill in some content in the paragraph. I'll copy this and put it in the first paragraph. I hope, okay, let me copy it manually. Get rid of this. Okay, and then let's generate a few more codes. Copy it from here and paste this under the other paragraph. Let's try to generate one more. uh, copy it from here till here and then paste it in section 3. So I've saved this. If we switch back to our UI, we can see that we have 3 sections with 3 headers, and then there is a paragraph under each section. All right, so this is our structure that we have come up with on the HTML side. Let's also try to come up with some sort of styling here. In this case, let me get rid of this. Click here, add a body. Body will have, let's say, I'll be adding, I have a few colors that I've picked for my background. So let me try to copy it from my other screen. So this is the background that I'm looking for. And then let me also add a font family of sans serif. Okay, so we have some background color. The other thing that we could do is to style H3 elements. So H3 elements, we want to make it look like clickable elements, and also hide all the paragraph content. So it should appear that the sections are all collapsed when we load the page. So that means all the content should be hidden. So let's start with styling the H3s first. For that, I'll go back and maybe add. Uh, I'll do this. So we can add a class to each section. Call it a section, and add these classes to the rest of the divs. And I'll target the section, and then I'll be targeting H3 under each section. Let's give it a color of white, and I have the other color that I've picked for headers. So let me give this color, background color, and also add some border radius of 5 pixels. All right, and let's give it a padding of 5 pixels so that there is some spacing between the text uh, and the border of this header. What I'll be doing here is um, I'll also add, if we hover on these sections, we still see a regular cursor. Just to make it appear like a clickable element, I'll add cursor pointer. Now we see a pointer cursor whenever I hover on top of this section header. The last thing that I would like to do here is to hide um, the content. So I'll do display none. Now we can see that the content has disappeared, and it looks like this is like a collapsed section. There are 3 collapsed sections. Uh, I'd also like to add one more style where um, if I give it a class called block. So this class is added to my paragraph. If there is a class called block that has been attached to the paragraph, then I'd like it to have a display of block. Now the task is whenever we click on one of the header elements, we should be identifying the click that has happened on the H3, and we should be able to target its sibling. Sibling is an element that is in the same level as the target element. Our target elements are H3s under each section, and we want to add a class called block to its sibling paragraph element. That's when we would like to show the content of that sibling element. To do that, we'll be adding some JavaScript. So there are different ways of adding events, right? On-click events to HTML elements. One way is to add on-click and then give it a class, give it a function name called handle header selection. So this is a name that I could think of. and you can give it a number called 1. So the number here represents the order, right? The one that I clicked on is section 1, so I'm passing in the number 1 here. So let's see if this is going to work. For that, I'll be adding a function called function with the same name, handle header selection, and then I'll give this. I'll call this a paragraph. I'll call this a parameter. Excuse me. I'll call this parameter with a number. Let's give it section num. Okay. So this represents the section number. The first thing that I'd like to do is just make sure that the section number is going into the function correctly or not. I'll click on inspect. I'd like to separate this out from here. Let's place it right here. Okay. Now if I go to console, I have this console, and when I click on section 1, it gives me 1, so which is currently working right now. I have my JavaScript already linked to this web page. If you might have not seen this, I've already linked my script file here. So that's how the on-click handler knows which function to call. In this case, it has called section 1. But when I click on section 2 and section 3, nothing happens when we click on this because we haven't really given any sort of click handlers to those elements. Now we can do that here by passing in 2 and also passing in, sorry, let's do it on h3, 3, and this has to be on this handler. Click handler should be passed into h3. Now if you look at section 2, section 3, and section 1, we are able to get the right number, section number that we have clicked on. So that means we have successfully added on-click handlers to these elements. But if you think, if let's say we have 3 sections, so we are able to do this manually. But if we have, let's say, 20 sections that we want to add click handlers to, in that case, we'll have to create 20 on-click handlers and then pass the right number into that function, the section number into that function, which easily becomes a lot hard to manage as the number of sections keeps on growing. So in order to prevent that, we can first get rid of these static on-click handlers. These are called inline on-click handlers. So they are passed into JavaScript elements directly. Instead of that, what I would like to do is I can add an event listener on a section, on any section, right? So let's do this. If I do const section header and then give this, I want to target the section header by document object model, which is the DOM selector method. I can do this by giving it a method, right? Which is I want to target all the elements, all the header elements by a class name or an ID. So we have both class names and IDs here. So if I do it with an ID, document.get element by ID and give it a section 1. So this is the ID, right? So if I do section 1, we'll be running into the same issue as before. Now we'll have to do this for 20 different elements. If we have 20 sections, we'll have to create a selector for each section and then add on-click event listeners. So there is a way to add on-click functionality on elements using a method called as add event listener. We'll talk about that very soon. But the way to target an element can be done using an ID which is the ID attribute here, or we can target multiple elements using a class name, right? So the difference between targeting an element using a section, or sorry, using an ID or a class name is equivalent to, so I can give you an analogy where if I want to, let's say, talk to Tom from grade 4, I'll go to grade 4, and then um, I can talk to Tom, right? Because I can identify him by his name. And otherwise, if I want to talk to all the kids in grade 4, I'm targeting, I'm selecting all the, I'm referring to all the kids under grade 4 by a class. So when you want to target multiple elements, that's when you use a class name. Otherwise, you use an ID. So in this case, if I want to target all the section headers, the other way to do that is by doing document dot get elements by class name. Class name refers to the class attribute here. So let me give it a class name of section. And if I want to add uh, an event listener, right? An event listener in our case, there are multiple events that happens on the web page, but in this case, we are interested only on a click event. So for that, what I'll be doing is I'll add an event listener and listen to a click event. For that, what I need to be doing is, uh, let's console log first, and look at how these selectors are represented in the browser. So I'll also add two more console logs here, section header 1 and then section header 2. And if you look at this, I see that there is a single element for section 1 and section 2. These are individually selected elements using the selector methods. But when you look at section headers, where we are getting a group of elements, a list of, or a collection of elements using a class name, right? That's where you will see an HTML collection, which is like an array-like structure, where we see 0, 1, and 2. So this collection starts from 0, 1, and 2. So in total, there are 3 elements. So when I hover on these elements, sections, you can see the highlights are happening on the browser. So this is what is meant by getting elements by class name. Now, the next task is, now that we understand how we can target HTML elements, the next task is to add event listener. An event listener is added in this way. So what I'll be doing is, for example, if we want to add an event listener to section 1 directly, I'll be doing this by adding a function called add event listener, and then functions are represented with uh, uh, the circular brackets, and we give an event name that we are interested in. So I want to listen to click events, and we'll also be adding an arrow function here, which means this is a callback that needs to be executed when we do a click on the section header 1. So for that, let me do this log click on section header 1. So let's see if this is successfully attached or not. When I click on section 1, I see that we are able to see this log that clicked on section header 1. So that means we were able to add an event listener to section 1. But what if we want to add click event listeners to all the section elements? We can do that by using the class name. But what we have to do is, the difference between the structure here is, as you can see in the HTML collection, you can't directly add an event listener like how we have added it to an element that has been selected by get element by ID. In this case, for an HTML collection, we need to loop or go through each element within the collection and then add an event listener to it. So for that, what we'll be doing is, since we know that it's not a good idea to add individual event listeners for per section, so let's remove these selections by ID, and let's try to stick with the selections that we have using a class name for time being. In this case, what I'll be doing is I'll loop through each element, or it's each element within a collection. Um, section header, section headers dot length, and then I plus plus. So what this means is I'm going through, I'm looping through section headers and one element at a time, and then per each element, which is section headers of I, refers to section headers of I will refer to an element, each element, like 0 will be the first element. When it loops through the second iteration, it will be 1, which is the second section. When it is looping through the third and final time, 2 will be the third section. So what we can do is we can, so section headers of I will be referring to the first element in the first iteration. So I'll be adding add event listener, and then add a click function, add event listener with click as an event, and I can do I can log the I can log a generic statement saying that a click on a section header, clicked on section header. That's the message that we want to log. Now, if I click on one of the sections, it tells us clicked on a section header. The same log will be repeated because we have attached an event listener to each of these elements. So if we look, if we think about this, we have done a similar thing of uh, adding an on-click handler to each element, but we have just done it dynamically using JavaScript instead of manually adding it to each element. But this is still the same issue. We have run into a same issue that has been done previously, right? So we are essentially adding 3 event listeners, and event listeners are attached to each of those sections. And if the number of sections grow in number, that is, if the number of sections are 20, we'll be adding 20 different event listeners, which is very bad for the web page performance, and it's not scalable. So now is the time to explain a concept in JavaScript where we can get away with adding a single event listener and still detect which section has been clicked. So for that, uh, we will be doing a small demonstration. So before that, I just wanted to explain one more thing here. Add event listener function, callback will have access to the event. So when I console log what is there in the event, let's take a look at what is E in this case. If I click on section 1, it gives me a pointer event where there's a lot of information, and this information uh, is very exhaustive list, but there is an interesting or a useful piece of information that we are interested in, which is the target. When you look at the target, we can identify that uh, the target is basically section 1 here. And when we, so this way we know which section is clicked. So although we have a generic message saying that clicked on section header, we also know that which element has been targeted, which element was actually clicked on. So that's a way to identify which element is clicked. Let's also do section 2, and we can see that the element has a value of section 2. Inner text is section 2. So that means we are able to identify exactly what element has been clicked on. All right. So instead of doing it this way, so right now we have added multiple click handlers and that is one click handler or an event listener for each section. In order to prevent that from happening, there is a concept in JavaScript, or basically there is a concept called in JavaScript called as event delegation. But before diving into event delegation depends or only works because of another mechanism that happens on the DOM. So that is, let's go back to our browser here, console, and try to expand what is there within the HTML page. In this case, if you look at the elements tab, we can see the HTML that we have in the index.html page. But this is actually collapsed and looks very convoluted, but it's essentially the same HTML that we have in the index.html file. So now let's talk about a concept called as event propagation. And then because of event propagation, uh, the concept of event delegation exists. So let's understand what event propagation is, and make a note of these keywords, because these are very important concepts that are explained in that are asked in interviews. So first thing is, whenever I click on a section 1, let's say section 1 is my target, so I clicked on section 1, what happens is browser knows that I have clicked on an element somewhere in the DOM tree. So this is called as DOM tree, uh, and that event, the target is called, the name of that section is called section 1. But it has to travel to that element to execute the click event. While it has to find the target, it goes through a phase called as capturing phase, which is, it starts all the way from the document. Document is the window. Actually, window is the highest level or the topmost level in a web browser. From window, it goes into document, and then from document, it goes into HTML, and it goes into body, and it travels all the way into the DOM tree where it finds the target. So this phase where the event travels, it searches for the event, right? The events are propagated. You can call it as event propagation. The first phase is where it captures where the click event has occurred. And then once it identifies the element that has been clicked, what the browser does is it executes the event handler on the target. So that's called as a target phase. So whatever is the event listener that we have added here will be executed on the target. And then after the execution is done, it will travel back all the way till the window in the same route that the captured has worked. So this path where it travels, the events are propagated back all the way till the top of the window, is called as event bubbling. It is similar to how bubbles are blown, right? It actually blows. The bubbles travel from bottom to up into the air. So that's why it's called as bubbling. So they go up. Generally, the bubbles are traveling up. So capturing is, we identify something by digging deep into the DOM tree, and then bubbling is somewhere the events are propagated from the innermost target element to all the way till the window. So if you remember what bubbling is, you can easily remember what capturing is, because capturing is the opposite of bubbling in this case. It's easy to remember bubbling because bubbles go from bottom to the top, and they expand usually. So that's how you can actually remember it. Bubbling is the opposite of capturing. So capturing is one way, and then the target is executed, and then bubbling happens the other way. So this is called as event propagation. So what is the use of, why did we learn about this in this tutorial? So by the help of event propagation, so there is a technique that we can use to add a single event listener instead of adding event listeners on each of these selections. So the idea is, when I click on section 1, we know that the capturing happens all the way from window to document, and it comes all the way to the section. And event as an event, I showed you the event here, right? When I click on something, we know the pointer event that has happened on section 1. But the event, the log that we have written here, the console log, we have directly added it on click callback function when we click on a section. But instead of this, you can also add an event listener maybe on the parent container instead of directly adding it to the section. That way, what happens is uh, when a section 1 is clicked, the capturing phase is done. It will reach the target. And while it is bubbling out, uh, all the bubbled events will carry the event.target information. The event information will have where the click has actually occurred. You can capture it at here or at the body or or at the document level, right? Anywhere on the top of this section element, you can capture where the actual click event has occurred. To demonstrate that, let's go back and comment out the for loop here, and also get rid of maybe I'll totally get rid of this code and start on line number 7 or 8, where I'll target a parent element of these sections. In this case, it will be container. Um, I'll do this. So container, I'll just call this accordion, where I'll create document.get element. I'm targeting it by ID because I'm interested in this div, a single div. So I don't want to capture, I am not interested in capturing multiple elements. I'm not listening to multiple element events. So I'm interested in only a single one. So I'll do it by ID here. In this case, what I'll do is I'll pass in the ID of container. So give me an element which has an ID of container. To this element, I'll add accordion dot add event listener of click, and then the callback function will have an event. Let's look at the event here. Now, when I go back to my console and click on section 1, you still see a pointer event, and within this pointer event, I'll go to the target. You can see that the target was H3. So although we have clicked on this element here within the section, we were still able to capture where which element has been clicked by listening to uh, an add event listener which is tied to our container. So that means when the click happened on H3, the target phase is executed. The event has bubbled up to then its parent, which is a div with ID section 1, and then it has further bubbled up to a div on with an ID container, and it will continue all the way till body and all the way till the window, and then it will stop after window. It's the propagation ends there because that's the topmost element. But we were able to capture the event at the container, which is the parent of the div section here. So this means we have let's do this target dot inner HTML. When I do this, it gives me that I've clicked on section 1. When I do this, it tells me that I've clicked on section 2. Section 3 likewise. So by using a single add event listener, I'm able to identify the clicks on any of these sections. So what this means is we have delegated the event listener capability to a parent instead of adding an event listener to each of the individual sections. So that's the beauty of event delegation. So this means we are able to get away with a single add event listener. This is very performant, and it's a very smart way to design or add event listeners, especially when a lot of you want to listen to a lot of elements, the events on a lot of elements, right? In this case, this is one example where we just have 3 sections, but imagine having 20 sections. You can't add on-click handlers to 20 sections because it takes up too much memory, because every element will have its own on-click functionality, and we are not doing anything different on each of these sections. The functionality is still the same, so there's no point in adding attaching an event listener to all those 20 sections. And remember this as a rule of thumb, like whenever you are designing something and there are a lot of elements that you are interested in, like if you hover on certain things or if you click on certain things, and if you feel that you are ending up by adding a lot of listeners on each of those elements, and the number of elements of such elements are high in number, then you should immediately think that, oh, I can solve this by adding by delegating the event listening capability to a parent, so that I'll be ending up with a single click handler instead of adding multiple click handlers on each of those elements or whatever event that you are interested in. So this is called as event delegation. Now let's complete the whole project here. Now that we have learned what event delegation is, our next job here is to identify the sibling of the current element. So we have clicked on section 1. Sorry, we have clicked on H3 element within the section 1. Likewise, we'll be clicking on other H3 elements. So first thing we want to know here is if event dot target. Uh, so the thing that we would like to do is if event dot target, and then uh, let's look at what event dot target is first. Event dot target. So what does it give us? So it returns us an element, so called H3. All right. So this means we know where we have clicked on. If I do section 2 and section 3, it gives us the right target. Now the ask is to find the sibling of the target, right? Remember that we are only able to click on H3. So the click could be, actually, let me take that back. The click could be anywhere else. So even if I click it on um, this space here, which is not a section, there will still be an event handler, click event handler that executes. Let's double check that. So when I click on this, it tells us that you have clicked on a container. So when we click on a container, we are not interested. We don't want to show any. We don't want to open any of the content of these sections. Only when the click happens on an H3 element, that's when we are interested, right? So the first thing that we would like to do is if event dot target dot, let's see, uh, let's give this a class. I like to give this a class called header. I'm giving this class because I want to make sure that this H3 has so let's do this. This H3 has a class name called as header. uh, all right, so now we have given this a class name called header and save this. If it's header, only then try to find its next sibling, and then give that sibling, which is a paragraph, a class called block. Let's do this. So click on header. So when I click on H3, it says clicked on header. Similarly, when I click on the space between these two sections, you won't see anything. Like you won't see this clicked on header thing. You'll only see the element here. So let me remove the event.target. We are not interested in logging that anymore. So only thing that we are interested in is whether we clicked on a header or not. Okay, now we know that we are listening to a click everywhere under the accordion, but we have further scoped the logic within the function, callback function, where we are executing some lines of code only when the target has a class name called as header. So that's when we want to execute something, do something. Now, what we would like to do is when we click on it, find the sibling element. That's the first step. And the second step is add a class called block. So this is what we do. So first thing is we'll identify if the element is a header element or not. If it is a header element, then we try to find a sibling element. Once we find a sibling element, we add a, a class called block. We can be sure um, of a sibling element. We don't have to check if it's a paragraph or not, because we know our structure of the HTML. So the way we can target is when I click on an H3 element, there is a method which will tell us, which will give us the next sibling, immediate sibling that is following the target. So that is by doing, we can make sure that it's giving out a paragraph element. That is by adding event dot target dot next sibling, next element sibling. Let's see this. Let's see what gets printed here. So I'm going to remove this and click on. See, like when I click on H3s here, the next element, next sibling element is paragraph. So when I clicked on section 1, it's giving me. So let's also do this. Let me add event.target and event.next element sibling. So when I click on section 1, the target that I've clicked was H3 section 1, and then the immediate sibling is appearing here. Similarly, when I clicked on H3, sorry, the section 3, the immediate sibling, which is paragraph 3, appears here. So this way we are able to target the next sibling. The final thing that we would like to do here is, so we were able to identify the next sibling. The final step here is event dot target dot next sibling, and then the next on this element we can do, we can target a function called as class list, a property called as class list. This class list gives out something called as a DOM token list. So let's look at how this looks like. So let's get rid of everything that we have so far, and whenever I click on something, I'll get the siblings class list. So in this case, the value is the DOM token list. There's no value in it, right? It says it has empty value. But if I go back and add, so right now let's not add anything. So it doesn't have any class to the paragraph element. But if I do this, there is a method. There are multiple methods that can be added to a class list. So here, one is add. The other property is remove. So which will add a class or remove a class. And then there is toggle, which will alternate between the first two classes that are there. So we are not interested in toggle right now. So let's do this. Let's learn the add property first. In this, I'll do block. Okay. What will happen here is, let's also console log the class list after this. Now, when I click on section 1, it will add a property called as block. And then we can also look at the DOM token list of our class list here. So when I open my DevTools console and then click on section 1, we have added a class called block to our paragraph. And if you look at the DOM token list, now it has a class called block. And if I go back to my elements and expand the body in the container in section 1, you will see that paragraph here has a block. Also, if you look at the other paragraphs, they do not have any class called block. This way we were able to dynamically, so dynamically, when I say dynamically, using JavaScript, the class block is not part of our HTML here, but we were able to add a class called block using our JavaScript. So that's called adding it dynamically. So that's where the interactivity of the JavaScript comes in. So essentially what we have done is we have manipulated the DOM. So the class is not present in the original HTML file, but using JavaScript, we were able to manipulate the DOM, which is the paragraph element, and add it a class called block. And then since we have a style where if a paragraph has a class called block, we change the display of that paragraph to a block. Display will be block. The original display will be none by default. The paragraph is display is none, which means it's hidden. It's not visible to the browser on the UI. But since we have added a block using JavaScript, and we have a style for p.block, which is a paragraph with a class called block, we are able to change its display dynamically and show it on the UI. So that's what has been manipulated here. Similarly, if let's say the other part here is, in order to remove an element, right? In order to remove the display block, we could actually do remove on it. We'll come back to it pretty soon, but let's try to click on the other sections and see what happens. So when I click on section 2, it adds a block to it, but I'll also pay attention to this paragraph. When I click on section 3, it has added class called block. But what happens when I click on that element again? So there's nothing happening. Now what we'll be doing is uh, when we click on that element again, and if it already has a class name called block, then we are going to remove it. So for that, what we can do is uh, we can one way is to uh, identify what the class list already has, right? We can try to get the existing class attribute. So that can be done. So let's do some googling here. So I'll do class list get class, right? So is there a way to get the elements here? So how do we identify how to read an existing uh, class within a class list? So maybe from this we can try to see here. There's a contains a property that we can use to see if a block already exists or not. So what I'll do is, if the target.class name is header, uh, first thing I'll do is check whether the content of the section is open. So if it is open, then we shouldn't add a class called block to it. Rather, we should remove the class called block. So first thing I'd like to check is if event dot target dot next sibling element dot class list dot contains block. So this will tell us that section is already open. In this case, I'd like to remove the block class. So that means I'll do remove, else I'll move this into the else block. In this case, I'll be adding it. So if the class list doesn't contain a class called block, I'll add it. I'll add the class called block. If it contains a block, then I'll remove it. So that way, when we click on an existing panel on the accordion, it will just toggle. So let's do that. I'll save this, and when I click on this, it opens. But when I click on it again, it closes, because this contains will tell us that a class called block already exists on the paragraph element, which is the sibling element of the target h3. So likewise, if I click on section 2 and then click on section 3, so these are different target elements, and the paragraphs are different paragraphs. So it will open. But if I click on section 2, which is already open, it will close. So this is how I'm able to build the accordion. We can also look at other properties to make this more simpler. So let's try to find how a toggle works here. Uh, Toggle is a function that alternates between two different states. So using toggle, we should be able to switch between adding a block class or removing a block class automatically. So for that, let's try to see how this will work. For now, I'm going to comment out everything under the if condition, and I'll be adding a toggle method to the class list. So let me go here and add toggle. And within toggle, we want to toggle the block class. So it will alternate between adding or removing the block class to the next sibling, which is the paragraph element. If I go back and let's pull in our console here, and let's try this. So if I open our section, each section, we'll see the paragraphs currently do not have any block class. Once I go back and click on section 1, we can see that the class block has been added. When I remove it, the class block has been removed. Likewise, when I click on the other sections, the respective paragraph elements show up, and when it's already open, they remove the block class is removed. So this is how toggle works. Using toggle, we can get rid of all the if else conditionals and also the contains check that we have been doing. So let me get rid of this. Now our accordion logic is even more simpler. It's just 7 lines of code with some formatting here, and and this is going to scale, right? If I continue to add more div elements, and this will still work, and it's also performant because I'm not going to add any additional logic to make this work. So it's still going to work with the current code that we have. So any number of sections, we always are going to capture that click event on the parent, and then with a single add event listener on the parent, and it will continue to work. So the takeaway from this lesson is, as a rule of thumb, whenever you find yourself adding too many click handlers or event handlers on the same level of elements, you should immediately think in lines of delegating those event listeners by taking that delegating the event listener to a parent level, where thereby reducing the number of times you try to attach an event, right, on these elements. So you can make use of event delegation this way, and the accordion is one of the best examples where you can explain event delegation when someone asks you about it during an interview. So that's how you build an accordion using HTML and vanilla JavaScript. If you think you've learned something from this video, please consider liking this video, subscribing to my channel, and also sharing it with your friends. You can also follow me on Twitter, where I post web development related content every day, and I'll see you in the next video.
Enchanté.